of my firearm, you rat! Ew.
Trouble was already creeping toward the quiet farm before anyone noticed, spreading like a shadow across the fields. Something dark was coming, and the man living there had no idea how close danger had gotten. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The farmer looked like an easy target to the gang that had begun circling his land slow, heavy, alone. But a twist waited beneath the surface. One that would leave everyone shocked. Marcus Hale lived his days in peaceful routine, tending rows of vegetables at sunrise and feeding his animals before the heat set in. The air around his land was usually soft and calm, broken only by the sound of birds or the rustle of wind across tall grass. Marcus was a large man, broad and heavy, with a gentle way of moving and a quiet voice that rarely rose above a murmur. Most people who met him assumed he preferred silence because he had little to say. In truth, he simply enjoyed the calm. His size and slow steps made him seem harmless, almost timid. But beneath that quiet exterior lived a depth no one in town truly understood. No one in the small town knew who Marcus had been before he bought the farm. They didn't know he once served as a Navy SEAL, moving through war zones with precision and strength. The scars beneath his shirt were reminders of missions that had pushed him to his limits, both physically and emotionally. Some scars were from injuries. Others came from memories that still woke him late at night. Farming became his escape, a place where he could breathe, rebuild, and find steady ground again. The rhythm of planting and harvesting offered peace from the harsh world he had survived. But calm never lasts forever. And Marcus didn't realize that danger had already begun creeping back into his life. The first signs were easy to dismiss. A hammer disappeared from his workbench. A section of fence lay cut one morning, as if someone had slipped through during the night. A bucket he always kept by the barn was moved 20 feet away without explanation. Marcus noticed every detail but chose not to react. Years of discipline taught him to observe quietly before acting. Still, something felt wrong. These weren't random accidents or harmless pranks. They were small, deliberate tests. Someone watching him, someone seeing how he responded. The air around the farm felt different, tighter, as if unseen eyes followed his movements. Marcus didn't speak to anyone about it. He simply repaired what was broken and waited. Sensing a pattern forming in the shadows, the situation shifted from unsettling to threatening. One morning, Marcus walked outside to find hateful phrases sprayed across his barn in thick red paint. The words were meant to wound, to remind him he didn't belong. A day later, he found one of his chickens dead, placed deliberately near his porch. Then his tractor refused to start. When he opened the engine compartment, sand poured out, a clear sign. Someone wanted to ruin his work and his peace. Marcus went to the sheriff, but all he received was a shrug and a dismissive, "Probably kids messing around." That answer only deepened the weight on Marcus's shoulders. He knew this was no childish prank. Someone was targeting him, step by step, testing how far they could push before he pushed back. The isolation grew heavier, and the threats more personal. It didn't take long for Marcus to figure out who stood behind the attacks. A local gang known for causing trouble had recently been bragging about putting outsiders in their place. Marcus, a black man living alone on the outskirts of a mostly white town, had become their new target. They saw his size as weakness, his silence as fear, and his peaceful nature as something they could exploit. Each night, their trucks drove slowly past his house, engines revving, headlights sweeping across his windows. They shouted insults and threats, growing louder and bolder with every visit. To them, Marcus was just a lonely, overweight farmer who wouldn't fight back. They had no idea how wrong they were. Marcus spent long nights sitting by his window, thinking about everything he had learned during his years in the military: patience, awareness, control, strength that didn't need to be loud. He knew fear was what the gang wanted from him, but he refused to give them that victory. Slowly, a shift formed inside him, not anger, but clarity. He understood this wouldn't end on its own. He wouldn't run, hide, or beg for help that wasn't coming. Instead, he would prepare. He moved around his property with quiet purpose, strengthening what needed to be protected and planning what needed to be done. He kept every detail to himself, letting the suspense build in the silence of his land. Marcus began preparing his land with the same calm focus he once used in hostile zones overseas. The first step was installing hidden cameras across the property, tucked inside birdhouses, fence posts, and even the old scarecrow in the field. Every corner of his land now had eyes. Next, he reinforced the gates and entrances with stronger locks and support beams designed to slow down anyone trying to break through. He worked quietly, never rushing, his movements steady and deliberate. Then came the traps, non-lethal but extremely effective. He disguised tripwires with fallen leaves, buried pressure plates beneath soft dirt, and placed flash devices where no one would expect them. Each trap was positioned to disorient, confuse, and halt without causing permanent harm. As he prepared, the tension around the farm thickened, building like a storm waiting to break. Marcus said nothing to anyone. He simply worked, patient and steady. Knowing the night he feared was coming soon, the gang chose a moonless night. Thinking darkness would keep their identities hidden, they arrived in 3 trucks, engines roaring like beasts across the fields. Music blasted from open windows, and drunken laughter echoed across the quiet land. Marcus heard them long before their headlights cut through the darkness and swept across his porch. Instead of fear, a heavy stillness settled inside him, the familiar calm he had felt before dangerous missions. The gang shouted threats as they spilled out of their trucks, stumbling across the yard with baseball bats and crowbars. Their confidence was overflowing, fueled by alcohol and the belief that the man inside the farmhouse would cower or run. The night air tightened with suspense as they spread out, stepping deeper onto the land Marcus had spent days preparing. Each footstep took them closer to the traps they didn't know existed. The gang thought they were hunting an easy target, but in reality, they were walking straight into a carefully planned response crafted by a man far more capable than they ever imagined. The first man to cross the fence triggered a thin tripwire hidden beneath dried grass. Instantly, a bright flash exploded into the night, lighting up the entire yard like a sudden bolt of lightning. Shouts filled the air as the gang stumbled backward, blind spots dancing across their vision. Before they could recover, Marcus's floodlights powered on, flooding the area with harsh white beams that turned every shadow into blinding glare. Panic spread like wildfire. Some tried to run but tripped over more wires. Others covered their faces, disoriented and confused. The sudden shift from darkness to overwhelming light left them helpless, scrambling without direction. Every step they took seemed to make things worse, activating more traps that intensified their confusion. What had begun as a confident, noisy invasion quickly collapsed into chaos. The gang realized too late that the farm they thought was unprotected had been turned into a maze of defenses they didn't understand. As the gang struggled in the blinding light, Marcus stepped out from the shadows with calm, controlled movements. He didn't shout or rush. Instead, he moved with the same precision and silence he had mastered during his years as a Navy SEAL. He approached each man with practiced efficiency, using non-lethal takedowns that left them stunned but unharmed. A twist of the wrist, a sweep of the leg, a firm but careful hold. Marcus brought them down one by one, never wasting a single motion. Their wild, uncoordinated swings only made them easier to disarm. The contrast between their chaos and his steady discipline was unmistakable. He secured each man with zip ties, placing them face down in the dirt, making sure none could escape or hurt themselves. By the time the last man hit the ground, the once rowdy gang had been reduced to silence, defeated by the quiet strength they had underestimated. When the police finally arrived, alerted by neighbors who heard the commotion, they found a scene they could hardly believe. The gang members were lined up on the ground, zip-tied and subdued, blinking weakly under the harsh floodlights. The sheriff stared at Marcus with his mouth slightly open, unsure what to say. It was clear none of this matched the stories he had brushed off. Marcus didn't offer an explanation. He simply nodded, turned off the lights, and walked back toward his fields. While officers gathered the defeated men, Marcus resumed his quiet routine, leaving them wondering what had really happened. News of the incident spread through the town faster than anyone expected. People whispered about how the quiet farmer had handled the gang without losing his calm. Some residents, embarrassed by their silence before, came forward with apologies and small gestures of support. Others avoided Marcus completely, unsure how to approach a man they had so badly misjudged. The tension that once surrounded his presence slowly shifted into a quiet respect. The town began seeing him not as an outsider, but as someone who carried a strength they had never taken the time to recognize. Marcus surprised everyone. By choosing not to press charges against the gang, he understood that the shame of being defeated so easily, and by the man they thought was weak, would follow them longer than any court sentence. The community watched as the gang members avoided eye contact, their pride shattered. Marcus didn't celebrate or boast. His silence carried a dignity far louder than revenge. He believed in discipline, not hatred. And his restraint became the final lesson the gang never expected to receive. The story of Marcus Hale became a reminder of how strength often hides in quiet places. His courage was not loud or aggressive. It was steady, patient, and earned through experience. Racism had walked onto his land with confidence, expecting fear, but instead met honor and discipline. Before you go, tell us where you're watching from. Stories like this remind us that true bravery doesn't always shout, it simply stands its ground. And maybe, if we confront hate with dignity instead of violence, we can finally begin to uproot it for good.